Well, we can't talk about the environment without talking about energy. And we can't talk about energy and the environment without talking about the economy. And we can't talk about those three things without talking about stability in the world, America's competitive role in the world. What is the responsibility of a citizen? At a time when we're asking less than 1% of our population to bear all the burden, make all the sacrifices, do all the fighting, do all the dying, and the rest of us get tax cuts. We think we're doing our part by putting a bumper sticker on the car, support our troops. And of course, the coup de grace is you have to have a flag in your lapel if you're a real American. And those of you who don't, you're not a real American, and you should testify in public as to why you're not wearing a flag. It's that kind of nonsense that we have allowed to define our politics and our country, because I think you can't write a book or can't talk about policy, or certainly you'll get yourself in a lot of trouble. I think it's been evidenced by some of the recent policy in Iraq and other places, if you don't know a little something about history. If some of these people in the White House and the Pentagon would have read just a couple of books about the Middle East, about Central Asia. I mean, I don't mean a volume or sit and think too much, but just a little bit of reading and focus and discipline, I think would have given a little different perspective here. The next president is going to be faced with an inventory of problems and challenges like, I believe, no president in modern history. Because if nothing else, it isn't just confined now to the shores of America, as I noted in some of the earlier examples: environment, energy, economy. We're now all interconnected in this global community of 6.5 billion people. And when you further examine that demographic, about 40% is under the age of 19 years old. And when you further examine those numbers, and when you look at the regions of the world, the most troubled regions of the world, there's where the largest populations of these young people are. So what we have here, partly, is a world that doesn't know America. We defined our relationships not by our differences, but by our common interests. Do we have differences? Of course we do. We have differences with all nations. Every nation will respond in its own self-interest. That's good. That isn't bad. If for no other reason, it's predictable. You have some constancy to that. What's dangerous is when you don't know how people will respond, and partly that's when you don't, a result of when you don't engage people. When you don't engage Iran, for example, there's unpredictability, and there's miscalculation, and there are all kinds of dynamics that fly around in that kind of nonsensical world. And it doesn't make the world more peaceful. It makes it more dangerous. We need $2 to $3 billion a day of foreign investment coming into this country to buy our treasury bonds, because we can't afford to pay the interest on our own national debt, just the interest on our national debt, by the way, which we spent more on than we did Medicaid last year, just the interest on our national debt. Civilizations commit suicide. They're not murdered. Oh, interesting. You think about proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the environment. We certainly have the capacity to commit suicide for humankind if we're not wise enough to put this back together in some structured way to get along, build alliances, have relationships, and depend on each other, because we are interdependent. We're dependent on the world. And a politician who says we're going to be energy independent. Oh, come on. We're not going to be energy independent. We can have a heck of a lot more energy security. We can do that, but we're doing these things to ourselves. It's what Toynbee talked about when he said committing suicide. But I also think we have disregarded Latin America, and I think we've got a lot of problems in Latin America, partly because we have, and this isn't the first president who hasn't had time for Latin America. I mean, throughout history, we have essentially just let our neighbors to the south kind of flounder. The world does not want an America that imposes, that dictates, that lectures, that preaches, that invades, nor occupies. I think the world does want a clear-thinking America that will lead with a consensus of purpose. That's what we've done most of the time since World War II. We've made mistakes, but most of the time America has led with a consensus of purpose. The Prime Minister of Turkey makes publicly makes public about a week ago, what the Prime Minister of Israel had told him, that Prime Minister Olmert would like to reach out to Syria and find some way to start attempting to make the Israeli-Syrian peace the next bilateral peace agreement for Israel. Prime Minister of Israel has told me that personally twice in the last year. I also get a blowback from senior, and I have to protect them, very senior people in the Israeli government and others, that the United States government out of the White House has said, don't move on Syria.